This is Dwayne again at Real Fixes Real Fast. Now today we're working on a 2013 Ford Expedition, and it's a problem with the heated seats. Now the trouble with this is you're not going to have any kind of a check engine light warning or anything like that. You're just going to notice the heated seats are not working. So how do you check that, and how do you make the repair? Well, here's what happened on this vehicle. They were driving along and they went to use the heated seats. Everything was working and the seats seemed to be working all right, and all of a sudden they smelled a burning smell, and then the heated seats started to stop working. So they went to use the switch. Now the heated switch button left and right are right here. They went to put the heated switch button on. Normally the lights would light up to indicate that they're on, but they would only stay on for a second like that and then go off. That indicates that there's a problem in that circuit for the heated seats, and it happens on both sides. Now again, if they stay on, the red lights stay lit, then the circuit's okay. So if that's your scenario, here's what to look for. Now the problem is, it's a burnt connector, but it's underneath the passenger seat where the controller is. So we're going to move around there now to continue. Now again, you may or may not have smelled that burning smell, and it may not have been while you were in the car at this one time. But here's what to look for, and then what the repair is. So we're at the passenger side. Now you see I've got a little light down there shining underneath the seat, so that's where we're going to go. So I'm going to move the camera down there so you can see what we're looking at. But that's where it's at, underneath the seat. Now if you look at this, you can see that I've got the connector disconnected, which is on the back of this black module. I'm going to zoom in on the bad spot. You can see the burnt connector right there. Test your knowledge. So what do you think caused this thing to burn? Arcing. Temperatures can reach thousands of degrees. So what causes the arcing? An air gap between the connectors, and it's usually caused by corrosion. Let's look at the diagram to see why this happens. Here's the whole diagram, but we don't need to see it all. Let's focus on just this lower section. Now you'll see the heated seat module, the body ground source, and how that feeds directly into the module. Notice that this ground input, number 5, is the only ground connector in the entire module. So all of the current for all the heat and cooling has to travel through this connector. Now corrosion at that connector creates resistance and a voltage drop, and that's why it gets burnt. Now a voltage drop causes all kinds of problems, especially when it infects the ground side of the circuit. To understand how this happens, we have to go back to understanding the difference between voltage and current. In any electrical circuit, electrical pressure, or voltage, pushes the electrical volume, or current, through the circuit to operate the load. And this electrical pressure, voltage, is supposed to be used up operating the load. Therefore, voltage falls to about 0 on the ground side, but current keeps flowing toward the battery. Remember, the electrical voltage, which is pushing, the current is flowing, and the current comes from the battery. The positive has to flow all the way back to the negative. So even though the pressure drops to almost 0 at the load, the current has to keep flowing back to the battery. Now resistance caused by corrosion on any electrical circuit can cause a restriction to current flow. So the problem in this circuit is we actually have 2 restrictions to the current flow. One is supposed to be there, that's the load, and the other is not supposed to be there, that's the corrosion. That second resistance causes unwanted heat, which expands the connector, creates room for the corrosion to form, and eventually causes the arcing. Now unfortunately this is very difficult to actually try and replace underneath the seat, so we're going to show you how we did it to make it a little bit easier. Now the best way to get this out is actually remove the seat. There's only 4 bolts that hold it. We're going to point to where they're at. There's one right there, one back, and then one on each side on the other side. Now these bolts are what we call star-bit bolts. Now you can't take the seat out just yet. We have some connectors we have to disconnect, but at this point you can actually just take those bolts out and then tip the seat backwards. And once you tip it backwards, now you can see the connectors that have to be disconnected. There's a big wire bundle coming out of the floorboard. That's all we have to do to get the seat out, and there's 3 connectors on the end. There's one big connector and 2 yellow ones. Now those yellow ones, they may look identical, but they're really not. If you look inside of them, they have a different way that they are indexed into the connector, so you really can't mix them up. So we disconnect those connectors, and now the seat's ready to come out. And the seat should then just kind of come right out. So that's what everything looks like underneath it. So here's our problem. As you can see, this is the female part of the connector, and it's obvious to see where the problem is. It's right here. It's all burnt and crispy. Now, unfortunately, we could actually pull that pin out and put a new one in, but all the plastic has been melted, so it would never be held in its right position again. Now, obviously, this is melted, and this is the female side. The male side is probably burnt too, so let's look at that. So you can see in here, here's the male pin. Now there's a little bit of deformation down there, but fortunately that one has not changed the shape of it. So when we put a new connector in there, it's still this part should still connect. We got this part off of Amazon. It's a Motorcraft part, and there's your part number. So here's our new part. It's just a female connector with long wires, and it's right next to the old part that has the burnt image in it. Now if you look at the other side where it's burnt, it's a smaller wire going into there. That's the burnt side. Now if we look at the good one, you can see it's a much heavier wire, and there's actually 2 wires in there. Now if you look at this connector, just to the right of the burnt connector, you'll see that there is no pin in there. Turn it over. And when we turn it back in here, there's no wire going to it. But on the new connector, when we put them up here, there is a pin in there, and there is a wire going to it. However, that wire is not needed in this application. You may be wondering, why is there another wire? Well, that's because this actual connector could be used for more than one situation. So now what we have to do is basically get this out where we can splice the wires in. Now if you look at this new part, it's got long wires on it. We don't need all that wire. So when we go back to the old part, we're actually going to cut that little piece of plastic tape out of there, and then somewhere in that range we're going to actually splice these wires in. Okay, now if you look at this, you see that we got colored wires, but the new connector, there's no different colors. So the best thing to do here is just cut one wire at a time and make sure that you're doing the same wire going into the same pin. That way you won't get it mixed up. Okay, so now we're going to start with the one that was actually burnt, which is the ground wire. And what you need to do is snip it in half here. Now stay a good 1.5 to 2 inches away from the connector so that we got room. Now on the cut side, we got to strip some of that insulation back. There's various tools for this. Now twist those wires together till they're nice and tight. Cut that, and we'll have to peel that back. Now look, you don't want all that wire, because remember how much room is down here? And this is under the seat, so you don't have all kinds of room for extra wire. So you want just some of that out of there. Twist that. Now in this kit, you have these little crimps that come together. If you don't have the crimps, they'll have to be soldered. you need to put some of that heat shrink around it. And then take a crimping tool. Make sure the copper part of that wire is well into the crimp. It should only go so far, but all the way in there. Then take a crimping tool and only crimp one side of it. Once you get it crimped, pull on it good and strong to make sure it's in there, because we don't want it to come apart later. Then we take the other end of the wire and put it in there. Now at this point, make sure you have your heat shrink on there first. Put it all on there, crimp it down nice and tight. Okay, so that is one wire. Now we're actually going to do one wire at a time and crimp them together. Now later we're going to come back to do the heat shrink, but I don't want to get one of them too close to the heat and cause a problem, so we're going to do all of our crimps and then come back and do the heat shield. Now we got several wires that have to be repaired here to change this connector, so it is much easier to take that seat out of the vehicle and put it up somewhere like this where you can put some light in there and actually work on it and get it done well. And then we just put the seat back. Now when it's time to heat shrink them, make sure that your heat shrink is centered around where that joint is so it can seal the wire on both sides. And you're best off trying to heat sink each individual wire rather than putting them all together as a bundle. Now remember, there was an extra wire. There's several ways you can do this. Now we just bended it back, made sure that the copper was covered with electrical tape, and now it's out of the way. You could just snip it off if you wanted to. Now before you connect that, remember the male part of that pin that was in here was all kind of melted a little bit too. It wasn't deformed, so we're okay, but you do need to clean it, because there's going to be some debris, and that's actually resistance. So just take some kind of a file like we have here, some kind of a flat file, and try and file that. If you don't have a file, you can use sandpaper or something like that, but try and clean that pin up as best you can before you snap it back together. Then it should snap in place nice and tight. Now before, that's where that little controller was when the seat was mounted in the vehicle. Of course, we have it upside down now. Okay, so we got it all together. Now it's time to put the seat back in the vehicle. The seat should just slide right back in place, and there's the 4 screw mounts that hold it down. Now you also have to put your connectors back together. After you get the seat all screwed down and tight, you need to put your covers back in. Now if you look at these, they're all held on with just little push clips. So you really don't need any tools, but they just go back together. They just snap in place. The front one is the same way, they're just little push-in clips.
push in from the front as opposed to going up.
So we're all done. Let's go see if it works. So the key is on, the engine started. Now if you look, our red lights stay on. That means the circuit is complete. So if you have a problem with your heated seats not working, or you smell some kind of a burning thing and you notice the heated seats aren't heating up, look for those lights. If they're not lit up after you push them on, then you have an open circuit. Now notice that you have heated seats, but you also have cooled seats. So the switch for the cooling is the blue button next to it. So it probably didn't work either. We didn't test ours, but they're all in that same controller.